Well, good morning. Welcome to Who's Left This Week, the unapologetically progressive Sunday morning political news show for Indiana. Our opening theme there is by Hoosier singer-songwriter Leslie Nuss, and my name is Scott Aaron Rogers. I'm broadcasting from Bloomington. Got another busy week in the news, the continuing war in Iran, a potential landmark ruling against social media companies, and the largest single-day protest in American history. I got a couple great guests to join me, talk all about that and why these stories matter to Hoosiers. But first, you know the drill. This is an independent media project. We don't paywall content. We don't have advertisers, and we certainly don't have any billionaire benefactors. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. It is a foundational principle of Who's Left and the Progressive Indiana Network that we refuse to hide important information behind paywalls in the middle of a political crisis, even if that is to our financial detriment. So please, if you find value in this work, and it is a lot of work, go to progressiveindiana.net and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month or $50 for the whole year to help us build the infrastructure that will pop the right-wing media bubble in this state. And if a paid subscription isn't in the cards for you right now, that's okay. You can still help out by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding our content to your people. You get us when you can. Mostly, we just want you here in this community of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us, and on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Who's Left. Progressive Indiana Network's handle is the full spelled out name on most sites, but on Blue Sky and TikTok, it is PIN Indiana. Please help us follow with please help us grow with a follow wherever you're at. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Now, let us welcome this week's guest, a couple of returning contributors to the program. And hey, oops, all Bloomington this week. First, there's our good friend Maria Douglas. Maria, welcome.
Thank you so much. And of course, my dog decided to bark right now and they're outside. But thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Maria is the co-chair of Hoosier Asian American Power, a feminist Asian American organization here in the state, doing great work there. Thank you for being here. And let us also welcome to the program once again from Physicians for a National Health Program and Medicare for All Indiana. There is Dr. Rob Stone. Hey, Doc. Morning.
Good morning, and it's a beautiful sunny day here.
It has been a lovely weekend so far. A little chilly yesterday for folks who were outside at the No Kings protests. We'll talk about that toward the end of the show. But first, we have to jump in again where we have been starting all of our shows for the last, month or so, and that is in the Middle East. Now, we're entering the 5th week of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, and if you believe President Trump, supposedly negotiating an end to it. Trump has set a deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face strikes on its power plants. Now, he extended that deadline before it even arrived, then he extended it again. Meanwhile, Pakistan is reportedly brokering talks indirectly between Washington and Tehran, but Iran's publicly denying any negotiations are even happening. The U.S. presented a 15-point proposal that's basically the same nuclear demands we were already negotiating before this war started. Iran countered with its own conditions, a 5-point set of demands, including war reparations and recognition of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. And while all this diplomatic back and forth is supposedly moving forward, both sides are intensifying military operations on every front. The U.S. and Israel are systematically striking Iranian nuclear infrastructure, uranium enrichment facilities, heavy water reactors, yellow cake production plants, which is a lot less tastier than it sounds. Iran's launching sustained missile barrages at Israel, hitting central Tel Aviv and striking near Israeli nuclear research centers. They also continue to launch missile and drone attacks at U.S. Gulf allies, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirates, Oman. At least 15 American service personnel were wounded in an attack on a Saudi airbase. Some are in serious condition. Iraq is caught in the middle of all this, with both the U.S. and Iran striking separate facilities there. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israeli operations have killed over 1,000 people and displaced more than 1 million. And on Saturday, Yemen's Iran-allied Houthi rebels entered the war for the first time, launching ballistic missiles at southern Israel. So you've got negotiations happening in one lane and escalating warfare on multiple fronts in another. Maria, you think these negotiations are going anywhere?
I mean, is that all that's going on right now? Like, I don't know if that's, and the thing is probably that's not all that's going on, right? That's just what we know. And so are these negotiations going anywhere? I mean, who knows? I mean, I think that's a theme right now, is like, who knows? Who knows what's really happening? Who knows who's really talking to who? Who knows what's being said, if they are talking? Just all these things when you're listing it out like in one breath, so to speak, is just overwhelming. And that's what it's supposed to be, by design, in terms of, distracting, and in terms of Trump, creating manufacturing, creating war, so he can come in, swoop in. I think this is his mind. I don't know. I don't want to claim to like know his mind, but
don't go there.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why, but anyway, but it's shown in history, recent history, that he creates this chaos. He creates these problems and then comes in and is like, well, let me fix them. Like, even, I mean, we're going to talk about it later, but even with the DHS and the TSA, now he's like, oh, I'm going to make a proclamation or what resolution that, people should be paid. Like he creates these situations. And so who knows? Like, who knows what's really happening?
Yeah, right. I mean, Doc, it's so much all at once, and we hear about these negotiations, right? And mind you, where's Marco Rubio in all this? He's supposedly a Secretary of State. I guess he's in Europe trying to sell the war. Meanwhile, the people actually doing these supposed negotiations, through back channels with Pakistan, it's friggin' Jared Kushner and Trump's old real estate buddy, Steve Witkoff. Like, I don't take these seriously. And furthermore, like, if these negotiations are going anywhere, you're certainly not seeing it with all of the escalation happening on multiple fronts. Like, this is a multi-front war now. You have the Iran front, the Israel-Lebanon front. You got the Houthis involved. I mean, it seems like the opposite of negotiations are happening.
Well, I think we just really don't know. The fog of war is always an issue. And with this war, I mean, there's just so many things that come up for me. It's just cutting my teeth in the 1960s and 70s with the Vietnam War. And I've been anti-war for a long time. Before I formed, my wife and I essentially, and a couple docs, formed Medicare for All Indiana. Before that, we were working on the trying to build support to stop the Iraq War before it started. But at least with Iraq, President Bush did get a war powers resolution. Maybe that's not the exact right terminology, but got a resolution through Congress that famously, in my mind, Hillary Clinton voted for, which was when I then decided I don't think I could support her, but I, of course, did support her when she ran for president, although I didn't vote for her in the Indiana primary. And I never miss a chance to remind people in the Democratic Party in Indiana that, when Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders faced off in the Indiana primary back those many years ago, Bernie won. So it's an interesting thing about Indiana Democrats. They seem to forget that. So anyway, back to the war. So I'll duck your question slightly sideways by saying that while I was doom YouTube scrolling, I came across an interview on British TV with where the guy being interviewed was the longtime former head of the British security apparatus, M1, M15, M16 or something.
The MI5 is
MI5.
basically they're, and then the MI6 is like their CIA. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So this guy who had had a long career running that organization had lost many colleagues to in various different ways to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard over decades, and he said, I think the tone of the war, the war, how the war is being pictured in the world, and how the negotiations are going to come out, is really in the favor of Iran right now. And he talked about, Iran's a 2,005-year-old country that was never colonized, and that all they have to do is survive in order to make the U.S. look bad. And they want to make the U.S. look bad so badly, and they've so successfully expanded the war. So it's really terrifying and frightening. And I find myself, as far as I can tell, pretty much every war that the United States has gotten into since Korea, no, we won't go back as far as Korea, but that was a war that we could talk about. That had effects on Maria's life in big ways. But Vietnam was a boondoggle, Iraq was a boondoggle, Iran is the mother of all boondoggles.
It really is. It really is. And well, okay, so we have to talk about the elephant in the room. And one of the thing about those boondoggles is that those were boondoggles of our own making, and in many ways, this boondoggle we are in at Israel's insistence, or we were dragged into it, depending on how you on who you listen to. So. While we're supposedly negotiating an end to this thing, Israel is using the moment to reshape the map and escalate its conduct. Their finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, called on Monday for Israel to annex Lebanese territory up to the Litani River. That's 10 to 20 miles inside Lebanon. Their defense minister, Israel Katz, backed him up and threatened Gaza-like destruction of the area, including the destruction of homes. And at the same time, while folks aren't looking at it, the West Bank is being systematically colonized while everybody's attention is elsewhere. Since December, Israel has approved over 6,000 new housing units in the occupied territory. Egypt and Jordan are warning that this war shouldn't distract the international community from Israel's continued encroachment there. Listen, even pro-Israel Democrats here in the U.S. are starting to object to settler violence. And if you've lost Dan Goldman, you've completely lost if you're Israel. The Israeli cabinet approved a decision to combat that violence and prohibit new outposts, at least on paper. But the real story is the conduct of this war. 3 journalists were killed in a targeted Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon. Israel is using white phosphorus, a banned chemical, to scorch the earth there, which Iran just struck back at by hitting an Israeli chemical complex linked to white phosphorus production. We also found out this week that a Palestinian miner died in Israeli prison, and a judge ruled he was likely starved to death, yet somehow still closed the case without charging anybody. Now, on our side, of course, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth hosted a Christian worship service at the Pentagon Wednesday, as he has been doing in this year since the Trump second administration took over. This is the first time, however, since the Iran war began. And at this service, he prayed for overwhelming violence against those who deserve no mercy. Those are direct quotes. He read from Psalms. I pursued my enemies and overtook them. I did not turn back till they were consumed. I thrust them through so that they were not able to rise. That is the theological framework being used to justify what's happening here, and it is having consequences beyond just the war zone, right? This week, a terrorist group in London set fire to Jewish volunteer ambulances outside a synagogue there, and because Israel's government claims, falsely, mind you, to represent all of the world's Jewish population, their conduct becomes ammunition for anti-Semitic violence against diaspora Jews. So you've got territorial annexation in Lebanon, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, documented war crimes, a Pentagon that's framing all of this as God's will, and then, consequences for folks. And listen, the Jewish diaspora largely does not approve of Israel's conduct. So I guess I'm going to start this time with you, Dr. Rob. What do you make of Israel's role in this? It seems like the tail is wagging the dog, as it were. I thought Israel was the United States client state, but it seems like we're working for them now.
Yeah, and I can't claim any real understanding of the geopolitical aspects of this, but I do have some in-law connections with Lebanon, which is a wonderful country that breaks my heart. And to see 1 million people displaced, 100,000 dead now, or not 10,000. I forget. Yeah, I think you just said the number.
It's like 1,200 dead, over a million now displaced. Yeah,
1 million displaced. I mean, this is just incredible and horrible, and getting very little attention in the United States because we're kind of overwhelmed with all this other bad news. And then there's these aspects of how Netanyahu is just like he's got his domestic political agenda that he's supporting, just like the Epstein files and Trump's domestic political situation, and then mixed in there are the Ayatollahs in Iran, who have their own internal political issues that they're fighting because they've been fighting dissent pretty brutally in their country earlier this year. So all this inside-outside game is so complicated, and I wish I had a magic wand.
There are no good actors in this situation, right? Like the United States, obviously, we are acting poorly, as we have done on the international stage for decades now. Israel's conduct in the West Bank, obviously, is well documented. This isn't the first time they've occupied Lebanon. They occupied them for years and years and years, beginning in 1982. I want to say it was 2000 before they pulled out then. And, now they're not only threatening to occupy again, but annex territory. And then, like you said, Iran, they're framing it as a religious war. We're framing it as a religious war. Maria, I don't know. It seems like I'm not a fan of organized religion. Is religion the problem here?
Oh my goodness. So that pause is like, how am I gonna which way do I take this? Okay, so I'm just gonna start talking so it's not just me here making noises while I think. So like Dr. Rob, I mean, I'm not a scholar of geopolitical, and I will say SWANA, and I do want to get this in real quick that I would really I'm learning this, and so I'm open to conversation, not today about it because we have an agenda, but instead of saying Middle East, and I'm not sure that you have said it today, but decolonial language is SWANA, right? So Southwest Asia and North Africa. So this is being specific, and this is naming, right? And it's inclusive, not just a term that was given, right, by probably us, right? So anyway, I just wanted to get that out there. Again, I'm just learning about that, and I am open to anyway, conversation, critique about that. So as a social worker, I'm always going to bring it, to civil rights violations. And so thank you for mentioning the white phosphorus. Okay. So in terms of organized religion, and so the couple things that came to mind when I read that article, when I heard about this, Hegseth like quoting Psalms, and I've been thinking about this for a while. When when MAGA people, I think it's safe to say, quote the Bible, it is often solely from the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And the Old Testament is the fire and brimstone, is the what happened before. And I will just say this, not per the Bible, happened before Jesus sent his son to be grace and mercy. Right. So they're all like, we're quoting the Bible and we're quoting this fire and brimstone stuff, but just similarly to these actions in terms of the war, in terms of who are being bombed, and you know, it's so myopic, right? It's just like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna buy, you know, not thinking about, okay, how we're leaving, and I'll just say we, you know, just speaking whatever, but how we're leaving the actual land, right? So even if the person gets in that we want to be in power, or would be great for us to be in power, it takes over, like, how are we leaving this actual land for them? Okay, so lots of tangents here, but also just that I just, Bible scholars, I would love it if they would take note of where these quotes are coming from in the Old Testament. And I choose, and even chronologically, I choose to look at to rest and to gain strength and drive from grace and mercy, right? But we're not talking about that at all when these people are quoting these Bible verses. So that's my comments on the organized religion situation.
Yeah, it's tricky, you know, when you have this deep conviction that you're right and God is on your side. You can use that to justify about anything. You don't see these guys, you know, fire and brimstone spewing like Matthew 25 out there. Like, I mean, and it's not like Jesus didn't have his moments of fury, right? You did give about flipping over tables in the temple. Like,
100%.
there's room for being pissed off about the way things are in the world, and not necessarily always just turning the other cheek, but doing it for right and not for conquest, as it appears we are doing.
100%. And I will even go this far, because I also am a scholar of deconstruction. And so I'm like, who wrote the Bible? Okay, who really wrote the Bible? And I'm a faithful person. I have a great personal faith with my God. And so I'm not I'm maybe anti-organized religion, but I'm not anti faith and spirituality and you know, okay. So who wrote the Bible? And this, for me also, I was thinking about all the, you know, about these first two, you know, things on the agenda in terms of Iran, Israel, the war, like all the things. And I kept thinking about boys and their toys. I was like, are we playing a real life game of Battleship right now? Like, let's get out all of our toys and let's see who has what, and let's see who's more powerful. And like boys and their toys is what the phrase that kept coming to my mind. And again, just that Bible situation, you know, from deconstruction, I'm like, who wrote the Bible? Like white men, or men at least.
Flawed men, yes.
Well, so
yeah,
those are my thoughts, and I could go on, but those are, you know.
Same. So yeah, I guess, you know, to regarding the boys and their toys, right? You can blow stuff up all day long, but to speak to what Dr. Rob was talking about earlier, you know, the Iran, Persia, this is a civilization that goes back thousands of years. Like, you can blow up stuff, but like you're not going to go in there and take the place. Good luck, or not. Don't do it. Bad idea all around. Let's talk about, though, the the thing that I think concerns most Hoosiers. You know, in a way, we're far removed from this thing, and I don't mean to minimize like the actual death and destruction taking place over there. But you know, here I think a lot of folks are more concerned about the economic fallout of this thing. And you know, we know Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz to most traffic. There were about 130 ships a day going through the strait before the war, now down to 6 or fewer. And it's not just that it's closed, it's like they're running it like a toll booth, and they're getting paid in Chinese yuan instead of dollars. At least 2 vessels have paid tolls settled in yuan, according to the shipping intelligence firm Lloyd's List. And this, stick a pin in this, because this directly threatens the petrodollar. You know, the fact that oil is priced and sold in dollars is kind of foundational to U.S. economic power in the world, and Iran is deliberately trying to break this. Ships from countries they consider non-hostile, China and Russia, obviously, India, Pakistan, even Thailand, South Korea, Egypt, Malaysia, they are being allowed through. But some countries that depend on Persian Gulf oil are absolutely getting crushed. The Philippines this week declared an energy emergency. South Korea is rationing fuel for the first time in 30 years. And while everyday people are paying more at the pump, there is credible evidence that Trump insiders are profiting off of this chaos. Traders loaded up on positions minutes before Trump announced he was extending his deadlines that I mentioned at the top of the show, making bets that predicted unannounced military operations with a 93% success rate. So, smells like corruption to me. Here in Indiana, let's talk about the Indiana angle of this thing. We're watching all this play out at the gas pump and in the fields. Diesel is over $5 a gallon, and that hits farmers hard. Apparently, every dollar increase in diesel translates to about 11 cents per bushel for grain transport. The logistics industry is getting squeezed, and when logistics cost spikes, grocery prices follow. And again, grocery prices were rising before the war started. And on top of all this, Indiana State gas tax goes up on April 1st. Now, the EPA has issued an emergency waiver to allow sales of E15 ethanol, but that fuel is harder on engines, apparently produces more smog, and that will barely make a dent in prices. Maybe it's good for corn farmers. I don't know. But I don't know. Doc, what does this mean for Hoosiers, and what kind of pressure is this putting on working families in this state?
Well, it certainly is multifactorially affecting farmers. And even though we're not quite the farming state that we once were, when so many, when the economy was basically family farms, we're still, if you look, when you drive down the highway, we're still a farming state. And the effects that the diesel prices have for everything, for running the tractors and for delivering the goods, and on and on and on. But also fertilizer prices, that's another thing that comes, nitrogen comes through the Strait of Hormuz, and a lot of farmers are about to order or have just ordered fertilizer, and I'm hearing about people are changing their orders now and deciding, it's changing their planning for what they're going to plant and when and how much. But there is nothing quite like the price of gasoline and diesel on the public psyche, because you drive down the street and you see the signs. Yep. All lit up, and so maybe it's just psychological, but diesel over $5 a gallon is pretty stunning. I want to so I guess my hope is that these kinds of things are going to come back to haunt candidates in this election coming up in November, maybe even, and quite possibly also in the election coming up in May, particularly within the Republican Party in Indiana, which seems to be kind of eating itself. And I think maybe you were going to get to some of that, including Liz Brown coming up here soon. So, but it is really emotionally challenging for me to be cheering for higher gas prices so that it will wake people up to connect the dots that their suffering is caused by decisions being made politically at the state and national level. So, but I want people to wake up. So maybe it's going to take some pain. I don't know.
Yeah, and I tell you, well, I want to plant the seed, Doc,
Right.
because we're going to talk about other things kind of throughout this program where I mentioned the word addiction,
Uh-huh.
and we're addicted to this oil. We talked about this last week. You know, we talked about the energy crisis of the 1970s and how there were warnings there, and the Carter administration sort of started to wean us off the stuff, and then Reagan came in and undid it all, and we're still paying for we're paying the price for those decisions now. Maria, we could have been off oil by this point if we had stayed the course.
We could have been off a lot of things. And that's coming from, and thank you for this question, and for me, like directing it to me, because as we know, I am an alcoholic and in recovery, and understand addiction from a personal level and from a educational level also. And yes, it just takes practice. It takes practice. It takes focus. It takes discipline, which we clearly don't have. Right. And so, you're right. I mean, there's not much for me to say about it in terms of it just takes practice, focus, and discipline, and the want to do that. Right. And so clearly, that's lacking. I do want to take this diesel situation, and you'll see me taking a lot of deep breaths, through this conversation, because these topics, do hit home, even for national level on down, to our gas pumps, to our wallets, to our tables, to the resources that we have in Indiana and locally. And so it takes a lot to regulate, right? But to Dr. Stone's point, or Dr. Rob Stone's point, I'm not necessarily cheering for the high gas prices, but I'm kind of just not going to react to them. Right. I'm kind of just letting it be and see what happens. But in terms of the truck drivers and the diesel, I did want to bring this to everyone's attention, that even though, truck drivers, farmers, people moving goods in Indiana are have to contract with truck drivers somehow, right? And truck drivers aren't always this huge company, right? Sometimes it's like one or two or five, a small business that has like 2 or 5, that's their fleet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is happening in our state on March 16th of 2026. Certain truck drivers received a letter from the state of Indiana, with Mike Braun, governor, right there, Kevin Garvey, commissioner of Bureau of Motor Vehicles, that certain truck drivers have only until April 1 to provide certain documentation. And these letters went out because you are domiciled in a foreign country and did not present one of the listed visa types during your most recent credential transaction. The BMV is required to downgrade your CDL. Your commercial driving privileges will be expired on April 1. And so they're instructed to go down to the DMV and rectify this. But I'm like, I'm not trying to go down to the DMV, like, let somebody know I'm coming, like, and we're, these specific, pieces of paper or whatnot, were they even asked for at my most recent credentialing, whatever, so anyway, not only are our farmers and our businesses that are trying to move goods around this state and the country, getting hit with these high fuel, I'm gonna guess that that their fleet, the guard goods are not going to be moving as much as.
So between the gas tax going up and maybe less truckers on the road, that's going to increase shipping costs. There might be delays. Everybody is going to wind up paying through the nose on this for this foreign adventure. We have to move on to our next story, but
wait, I was just getting started.
I know we are just getting started. There's so much. We could spend 2 hours just talking about this thing, but let's look at some other international news before we move on. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in the Swana, right, Maria? I have Middle East typed right here on my script. He was in that region this week, visiting Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, signing defense agreements with those countries and offering something they need: Ukraine's expertise in shooting down Iranian drones, because Ukraine has been doing that for 4 years, ever since Russia started firing these Iranian-made Shahed kamikaze drones at Ukrainian cities. Now, apparently, Russia has upgraded that technology and is sharing it back with Iran. So Zelensky is turning that battlefield knowledge into a bargaining chip, trading cheap battle-tested drone interceptors to Gulf countries in exchange for the expensive Patriot missiles Ukraine desperately needs. That's if we're not running out of those. Meanwhile, back home, back in Zelensky's home anyway, Trump's peace framework would require Ukraine to withdraw from the Donbass, something Zelensky is flatly refusing, saying it would both destroy troop morale and displace tens of thousands of civilians. So he's fighting a war, negotiating a peace he does not trust, and selling this weapons technology all at the same time. And now back here on our side of the planet, in the Western Hemisphere, where the U.S. is busy being the U.S., Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president we snatched in January on fake drug trafficking charges, appeared in New York, a New York courtroom this week. The man whose country sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, facing charges in a U.S. court. And meanwhile, the U.S. military is still attacking reported, alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. Another 4 men killed this week. And Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is reportedly pushing what the Trump administration is openly calling a friendly takeover of Cuba, using fuel cutoffs there as a weapon of destabilization, since Venezuela, again, whose president we kidnapped, was Cuba's primary energy supplier. Oil, right? It's always the oil. So I guess just a couple quick comments on these other international stories before we move on to something else. And Dr. Rob, I'll ask you, what do you make of Ukraine in their situation here? They're in quite a pickle. Obviously, they have been, but in a way, this other front opening up in this war kind of has given them a bit of a bargaining chip.
Okay, now I've got to channel Maria here and take a breath before I think about how to respond to this, because you're definitely drawing me into areas outside of my expertise. But it is, I mean, and the other headlines that tie in directly with Ukraine are that there is this talk about that money already designated or promised for Ukraine from the U.S. is maybe going to get diverted to the Iran war now. But it is so ironic, I guess, that Zelensky now has, the man still seems to me to be brilliant, that he's figured out ways to work in this complex international twisting and turning situation to take advantage of how his government and his army have become kind of the world masters on drones, both offensively and defensively. And so, I don't know what else to say other than it's really complicated. Again, I think I'm repeating myself.
I think it does. It goes to show that the old way of fighting wars with these big hulking battleships and these $1 million missiles and these interceptors and stuff, it's like already obsolete. And Iran is showing that you can send up drones that cost, maybe tens of thousands of dollars, and you get your enemy to waste millions of dollars shooting them down. It's just not sustainable over any kind of time horizon. Maria, looking back at our side of the world over here, I feel like everything going on over in Iran and the Gulf right now is distracting from the mess we still have that we've made here at home, with Venezuela and Cuba. That's going completely under the radar. It's another front. The U.S. basically conquest over another country, right?
Wow, we are on the same. We are just right now, because that's what I was going to comment on, that the United States, and I'm going to bring up the Epstein files every single chance we get, right? So look at what happened there. So we're founded on coercion and violence, right? So that's what we're doing, and this is how certain people like live their lives. I was also thinking about this, we used to say, I can't remember, I didn't have time to look it up, but we used to have this like thing that we would say, like, do you need a hug from your mom or something like that when somebody was like misbehaving or being, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? These people did need hugs from their mom or hugs from somebody, because they're like behaving in this very inhumane, violent, I think it just covers it, way. And that's what and I can have compassion. There's certain teachings that, you have compassion, for flawed individuals, right? And flawed things. I can have compassion that they may not know any other way. I can have compassion that they, needed a hug from somebody that really cared for them. And boys and their toys behaving badly, behaving violently, behaving in a coercive way. And people, they're talking so much locally and nationally, and they love to say fraud. They love to say that word fraud, right? But you know what? They're the ones doing the coercion, which is fraud. Fraud is in that definition.
Yeah, well, and when we only mentioned it in passing, the market manipulation going on in all of this, and to speak to your point though about the boys and their toys, and they needed hugs from their mommies, right? Like, you hate to show any sympathy toward Trump because he's such a monster, but man, hurt people, right? Like, that dude's parents were not good. Like, his dad was a monster. His mom was apparently not much better. And you wonder if somebody had just like hugged that dude 70 years ago, if we'd be in a lot better shape right now as a country, right?
100%. And we know, and so that's another way that we can like talk, as Hoosier Asian American Power, we're nonpartisan. I very much enjoy my nonpartisanship, issue based, more, can pay attention to issues on that, a more granular level. Now I can't remember what I was going to say, but being able to talk across the aisle, right? Talk across the aisle, talk across issues, talk across party lines, calls for that compassion. Because if not, we're like hitting violence with violence, right? And I used to say I was an anti-violence, but I'm not saying that anymore, because I think there is a time and a place.
Sometimes you got to punch the bully back, right?
I'm not naming the time or the place, but I'm just going to say that there's a time and a place. But anyway, yeah, I know we need to move on, but yeah, having compassion, seeing, people as flawed, but having compassion for those flaws, can help conversations, I feel like.
Well, okay, so along those lines, right? There's going to be a way in with a lot of people, I think, because this war and everything is hitting people where it hurts in America, and that's in the wallet, right? Because like we said, that's what most Americans actually care about. We're not under direct physical threat in this thing. We're under a financial threat. So we talked about working families getting squeezed at the pump and the grocery store and utility bills. All while that's going on, Trump is literally putting his signature on the money, right? The Treasury Department announcing this week that his name will appear on all new U.S. paper currency. The first time in American history a sitting president's signature has gone on bills. Now, they're framing it as a 250th year anniversary honor, but mostly it's just, hey, look, the small man needs to be honored at all times. Along those lines, House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled a new award he created specifically to give Trump a golden statue called the America First Award, right? So the president is signing the money and accepting golden statues while people are struggling to pay their bills. Will that money with his signature on it even touch the hands of most Americans? Now, his MAGA House of Representatives, they're not doing anything. The Senate passed a bipartisan bill that would make manufactured homes at least more affordable by removing a single unnecessary requirement. But the House, of course, is sitting on it. They're too busy trying to make it harder for Americans to vote. Indiana is a perfect case study for all of this. For the second year in a row, state employees are getting no pay raises, even as Indiana sits on a nearly $5 billion surplus. The money is there, right? The political will isn't. On housing, a new report found Indiana is tied for the worst affordable housing rate in the Midwest, with only 34 units available for every 100 extremely low-income renters. In Marion County, it's 24 per 100. In some state house districts, it's as low as one unit per 100 low-income renters. And your utility bills, they're going up too, not just because of the war, but because Trump ordered 2 aging Indiana coal plants that were scheduled for retirement to keep burning coal through at least June. NIPSCO and Centerpoint say the cost is already climbing into the hundreds of $millions, and that bill will eventually land on Hoosier ratepayers. As Citizens Action Coalition put it, the federal government invented a grid reliability crisis to commandeer uneconomic, dilapidated power plants and stick us with the bill. Doc, this is what it comes down to for most Americans, right? Is just affordability to live. And Hoosiers, I think, we're finding are getting squeezed even more than most. Gee, can you chalk that up to 20 plus years of supermajority leadership here in the state?
Oh, yeah, it's true that the legislature doesn't represent the people at all. And the other piece of that actually marvelous summary you just put together is that this pressure for housing immediately then causes a pressure of rising rent. And so, people can try to stretch out and drive less, and people can try to squeeze their grocery bills and stuff like that. But when the rent's due, the rent is due, and you can't put that one off. And so that one really hits hard. And and of course, I could talk about, when we're talking about affordability, we can talk about healthcare too, because healthcare is getting more unaffordable all the time at all different levels in the state, particularly a lot of things to do with Medicaid, and we'll come to this later, I think, too. But much of which can be laid at the foot of the supermajority. So, yeah.
Well, and Doc, it's all of that stress, the financial stress put on folks in the middle of affordability crisis. It's not good for your health, right? I mean, stress affects all of your body's systems, does it not?
Absolutely. And it wears you down. It raises your blood pressure. It makes it hard to sleep. It's depressing, on and on and on.
Well, gee, Maria, maybe if they drive us nuts, or put stress on us and make us suffer early deaths, some housing will open up. Gee, look at the bright side. My God.
Whoa. Oh
the
my
dark
God.
side.
I mean, I'm not about toxic positivity, but I am looking at and I love dark humor. Okay. Anyway. So this is just all very interesting in terms of our upcoming elections. Like again, just such a myopic view of the way things really work in terms of our local legislation, local legislators, right? I'm seeing in the chat, things about, we hope we turn blue, things like that. I'm just hoping for purple at this point. And what the legislators are doing, the supermajority are doing, is literally helping us do that, because they're not protecting us. They're not making decisions that protect us, specifically around Medicaid. I mean, that's what SB1, right? And then how embarrassing for us to be so low in the polls. I attended a Hoosier Vote Summit that we're up in the 40s now. We used to be very low in being the 49th state, in terms of voting turnout or whatever. Now we're like 44 or something like that.
50 out of 51 last time I checked.
Oh, right now. Okay. Well, that professor just misquote. Anyway, embarrassing. And embarrassing that you want to be like, we have a super majority because we suppress voters. I mean, how embarrassing is that? And again, that myopic view, like, it doesn't matter, we just win, we're winning. And letting Hoosiers suffer because Hoosiers are suffering is not, maybe might get them to the polls, but even though voter registration, protection, and turnout is something that Hoosier Asian American Power sinks a lot of time and effort into during election seasons. If somebody is struggling to put rent on the table or driving Lyft just to make ends meet or whatever, they're not going to waste their gas to go to the polls. And here in Bloomington, I could go on. We only have precincts. We don't have vote centers, right? So people are it's a whole situation. And so I think, and I hope, and it looks like it's probably going to backfire on them, because statistics show that actual Hoosiers are more purple, are more blue than voter turnout and vote whatever the outcomes show.
We are
So
not a
they're
red
digging
state.
their
We
own
are a red
graves,
state.
kind of,
For sure. Well, we can only hope, and it sucks that people are going to have to suffer for it to sink in. Speaking of suffering, the U.S. has been good at handing our suffering to the rest of the world, and I saw this one in the Guardian this week. So, we mentioned the coal that the Trump administration wants us to keep burning. They're forcing our utilities to keep burning this coal, even though it is not in their financial best interest. So let's zoom out and think about what this leads to on a grand scale. And a new Stanford study this week, excuse me, there we go, published in Nature, put a dollar figure on it. Since 1990, the U.S. has caused $10 trillion in global economic damage through its carbon emissions, more than any other country on earth, ahead of China's $9 trillion. And that's just since 1990. That doesn't include the immense damage we did before then, when we were the world's largest fossil fuel burner. And about a quarter of that damage has come back to hit us at home. It is not just over there, right? We've caused $500 billion in damage in India, though, $330 billion to Brazil. And here's the part that should make you really angry. Researchers say future damages from those same past emissions will be 10 times larger than what we've already experienced. 10 times. Now, meanwhile, our friends in Hawaii are already experiencing massive consequences from climate change, right? The state is digging out there from the worst flooding it has seen in at least 20 years. Homes have been swept off their foundations, cars floating out of driveways. More than 230 people have had to be rescued from rooftops. Governor Josh Green says the damage could top $1 billion there. Climate scientists say the intensity and frequency of these storms is increasing because of human-caused global warming. But here in Indiana, right, all this is happening globally. Our state's director or Department of National Research, having a hard time here. Our state's DNR director, Alan Morrison, is quietly neutering the Natural Resources Commission, the oversight body that's supposed to have input on environmental issues. Morrison started bypassing the commission entirely, writing rules on his own, and presenting them for a rubber stamp vote. The commission's own chair, Brian Pointer, said the commission is now neutered. And that's a quote. The rule they pushed through this week, it grants the DNR authority to approve underground carbon sequestration permits over the objection of landowners. The commission narrowly survived elimination this past session at the State House, and now apparently it's being slowly hollowed out anyway. So, listen, Doc, we're seeing the consequences globally. Global warming is here. It's real. It's now. Hawaii, right? In the United States, we've got Americans facing climate consequences. Here in Indiana, it seems like we're not taking it seriously at all. Like they're continuing to implement these, quote unquote, business friendly practices. Well, if you take these numbers and extrapolate them out, that's not very business friendly in the long term, is it?
No, it's literally poisoning us. And the idea that we're going to whip these dying coal energy, electricity generation things a little bit more, which, that stuff just blows across the state and then, gets to Indiana and Kentucky, to Ohio and Kentucky, but it makes the air quality poorer. We already had relatively poor air quality in Indiana. And that doesn't even mention the problems with the coal ash, which nobody has come up with a really good remedy for. It comes back pretty quickly to us, but people with respiratory problems, it's just really sad for people with asthma and other breathing issues. So it's one thing after another. Where does it all end? And one other thing I forgot to mention is that the other thing they want to sneak in the back door now, or maybe not even through the back door, they're coming right through the front door, are these local nuclear plants, so-called small nuclear plants to feed the data centers and stuff. And I think you've talked a lot about the data centers in the work you've done, Scott. But that always kind of looms there too as another way that we're the ratepayers and the taxpayers are subsidizing the data centers for the billionaire class in some ways.
Right, and they talk about these modular nuclear reactors. I think it's still just theoretical. I mean, I think this technology is unproven. We actually haven't seen it anywhere. I mean, I don't know. Like, on one hand, hey, at least nuclear technology is carbon neutral, but boy, you got all the other fallout. And listen, Maria, I want to talk about
literally fallout.
Well, the problem here is capitalism's short-term thinking. It's only looking at the next quarterly report and not the long-term horizon. So boy, you burn through the fuel now, whatever, we'll deal with it later. Well, later is now when it comes to this climate stuff. And, I guess if you want to tie it to that nuclear stuff, hey, well, it seems like a good idea. It's carbon neutral, but like we know capital will always take a shortcut, right? And they're not going to plan for what could happen if it costs an extra couple bucks up front, right?
Yeah, that capital will always take a shortcut. That's the problem. That's the problem. As we've been talking this whole time, this whole morning about those shortcuts and those not well thought out plans and actions. And I mean, we're seeing, so I tell my children and myself that, there's so little that we can control in this life, right? So the things that we can, like our grades, for example, or like, things like that. I'm like, let's do our best there to open up opportunities, not just now, but later. A lot of things you can go and do over, but high school is not one of them. That's an interesting concept. Anyway, squirrel.
There's movies about this. Yeah.
So that's right. So it seems like the things that we're talking about in terms of emissions and these data, like these are things we can control, right? These are things that we can have some control over, to affect. And it's not just here in Hawaii, it's not just here in Indiana. How many tornadoes have we had that actually have touched down and caused major damage? So it's not, for some people who need things to happen to closer to home, I mean, let's talk about that, right? Because I've lived in Indiana 45 years ish, and I never have seen so much destruction from tornadoes. Now, we always had the warnings and whatever, but not so many touching down and causing such mass devastation.
It's only going to keep coming. It's like the Simpsons meme. It's like, oh, the worst so far, right? Yeah, that's every year, every storm season just keeps getting worse. And yeah, I would say get used to it, but don't get used to it. Because it's going to change. It's going to keep getting more and more. It's scary stuff to even think about. We do have to move on to our next story here, and want to change lanes here. So there's a new head of the Department of Homeland Security this week. Mark Wayne Mullen was confirmed by the Senate, and he takes over at a precarious moment. TSA agents spent the week calling in sick because they weren't getting paid after Congress let DHS funding lapse. Senate Democrats had been trying to attach accountability rules to ICE agents like masks, proper training, and body cameras. So with all these call-outs, airport security lines backed up for hours. Delta got so fed up, it suspended its specialty services perks for members of Congress. Maybe that's what got their attention, because by Friday, the Senate did pass a bill to reopen much of DHS after President Trump signed an executive order going around Congress to pay TSA. So now, while this airport chaos was happening inside the terminals, disaster outside on the runway, as this week an Air Canada plane crashed into a fire truck on the runway at LaGuardia Airport in New York, killing both pilots and injuring dozens of passengers and flight crew. The NTSB found at least one of the two controllers in the tower was juggling multiple roles simultaneously and raised serious concerns about workload demands on midnight shift controllers, especially at one of the busiest airspaces in the country. But on the ICE side of the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice this week was forced to admit in court that ICE has been lying about its legal authority to arrest people at immigration courts. Hundreds of lawful asylum seekers and people seeking citizenship were arrested based on a memo that the DOJ now admits never authorized those arrests. And the DOJ wrote that it, quote, deeply regrets this error and blamed ICE. But then DHS immediately issued a statement saying there's no change in policy and they're going to keep arresting people at immigration courts anyway. The state of Minnesota is suing the federal government to obtain evidence related to shootings by federal officers during the recent ICE surge there. In California, in San Diego specifically, a private company is investigating reported rapes at an ICE detention facility instead of local law enforcement. That is the inmates investigating the asylum. And Venezuelans who had been deported by the U.S. are detailing torture and abuse at the CCOT mega prison in El Salvador. All right, what's the Indiana angle to all of this? Immigration is literally the only reason our state's population grew last year, according to IU research. International migration has been Indiana's largest source of growth for 4 consecutive years. That growth dropped 53% from 2024 to 2025, coinciding exactly with Trump's immigration crackdown. IU's senior demographer is already warning that a shrinking immigrant workforce poses serious economic consequences. So, Doc, I mean, listen, if the airport stuff, obviously, that sort of was the big story throughout the week. Where of the many things we're addicted to in this country, convenience is one of them, and hell hath no fury like an American inconvenienced.
Well, the airport side, on the one hand, is kind of bourgeois suffering, but on the other hand, it's again like when I talked about that you go down the street and you see the gas prices, and for a lot of people they who do fly, you see that one because you've already been inconvenienced in the airports, and air travel is so stressful anyway, and then the increasing risk that there's not enough people in the control tower and that your plane's more likely to crash, and it all leads to a lot of anxiety, and which once again brings us back to this sense of how do you respond to all this fear and anxiety and stress. And I think one of the things you got to do is figure out how to get together, how to join together in solidarity, how to build movements. And it was really good yesterday for me to be at the No Kings rally in Bloomington. Half the courthouse square was shoulder to shoulder with people, and the other half was where the tabling was going on, and there were just conversations going on everywhere. Our Medicare for All group was in doing tabling, and it was wonderful. So somehow that's got to get turned into voting, and people need to wrap their heads around the depression, the despair, and then the action. What do we do? Because we're not helpless. We feel helpless, and that's kind of what the bad guys want us to do, is to feel dispirited. And we got to find ways to lift our spirits up and get out there and do stuff. And again, thanks to you, Scott, for you're doing more than your share. And Maria, you too. I mean, I think all of us are people who are activists. And but we can, the only way that works is if people listen and feel empowered to do something.
Oh, well, boy, I'll tell you, I'm starting to feel the burnout, and we've got a long way to go in this thing. But I mean, Maria, it's hard not to feel dispirited because these are self-inflicted wounds. We are doing this to ourselves. So many Hoosiers chose this. You know, I remember the Republican National Convention and the mass deportation now signs. They told you what they were going to do, and 60% of Hoosiers were like, sign me up for that. And now we're seeing, listen, so much of our economy depends on having immigrant labor. Just like this affordability crisis, everything else, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, aren't we?
Aren't we? You know the okay. So I just wanted to comment that on Mark Wayne Mullen. I was like laughing when you were talking about that, because for whatever reason I tuned into the swearing in or whatever, and it was like it was a comedy show. Now, no, I want to be clear, no shade on mixed martial arts fighters, because my partner has been a professional fighter, is still trains and whatnot, so that I know there with that comes discipline and a lot of health benefits. And for Donald J. Trump to go on and on about Mark Wayne Mullen being a mixed martial arts fighter, like go on and on about it. It was comical. I was just like, what? This is a joke. Like this is, anyway. So I just wanted to mention that. Oh, so much about immigration, you guys. So I want to take this platform to mention, for again, people who which no shade, because that's just how we are as humans, that need things to happen to them or close to home to make it real. I want to be clear that Clay County Detention Center has upwards of 300 detainees that have been there for months. They are not able to go outside. There's a room that is to have that has like a skylight in it, but it's really just a tiny window. And this isn't conjecture. This isn't hearsay. There are mutual aid groups that go into these facilities, and Hoosier Asian American Power, and I'm very active in the immigration network that exists here in the state of Indiana. And so Clay County, and then I also want to mention the Miami Detention Center. They have upwards of 600 detainees. So just let that sit in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so I got the argument from the pro detention crowd would be like, oh, look, that's employing guards and stimulating the local economy, right? Which is total horse crap. I mean, I think somebody in the chat who lives up in the Elkhart region says the RV manufacturers, which like so much of the RV industry is based in northern Indiana, like for the entire country. You have no idea. She says they're begging for help up there. Well, if that industry is struggling in northern Indiana, that's like that's the entire economy up there, and that percolates through everywhere, and it affects everybody. So once it starts to hit your neighborhood, you're really going to feel it. So you might like to pass your suffering off on this other, the immigrant. You might need somebody to look down on if you're not doing well. Well, listen, it's not to your benefit in the long run. We need each other. We need these folks in our community to have a healthy economy. So
yeah, and I want to just I did mean to interrupt because that's what I did, but I apologize. But I also want to address though your comment and your very transparent and vulnerable statement of feeling the burnout, right? A lot of people are, and they're banking on that. So I just want to suggest something for contemplation or consideration in terms of this is what keeps me going, that the light is being shed on the darkness. I think I maybe have mentioned that before. It's not, things seem to be getting worse, and they maybe are. And it's also just, the amount of information that we have access to, and that light being shed on all the wild things that happen and go on. Right. I also had, just while you were talking, I had a vision of not a vision, but like a thought about, I think in wildfires, like in California and such, sometimes they set a fire to combat the other fire. And so it burns itself out. Right. So I'm like, okay, let's take a breath, because let's let them burn themselves out, Yeah.
Well, so I guess to that effect, like the work that folks like you guys are doing out there, and activists throughout the country, and everybody just bringing attention to the atrocities of this administration, it is having electoral consequences. People are changing their minds. They're coming out to vote in elections when it matters. We'll see if we're going to have free and fair elections in this fall, but to this point, in state and local elections anyway, people are resisting this administration. Now, again, if we have free and fair elections, Republicans should be terrified heading into November. This Tuesday, Florida held special legislative elections there, and Democrats flipped 2 seats. The first was House District 87 in Palm Beach County, the district that includes Mar-a-Lago, where Democrat Emily Gregory beat Trump's personally endorsed Republican by almost 800 votes in a district Trump won by 11 points in 2024. Now, the second flip was a state Senate seat that Republicans won by 10 points in 2022. Last time it was up for grabs, and Democrat Brian Nathan won that by a slim 400 vote margin. This now marks 29 state legislative seats that Democrats have flipped from Republican control since Trump took office. In January 2025, Republicans have flipped exactly 0, right? And my favorite part of this week and these special elections in Florida is that while Trump has been complaining and railing against voter fraud and mail-in voting and saying that it's fraud prone, well, guess who voted by mail in the Florida special election while pushing Congress to ban no excuse mail voting nationwide? It was Trump, right? So listen, he and his allies know these numbers, and they're already laying the groundwork to engage in shenanigans, I guess, this year in the fall. In California, a Riverside County sheriff is attempting to recount 2025 elections ballots there. He seized those, and a California court this week denied the state's bid to halt his recount. Meanwhile, Politico this week published a detailed breakdown of how Jack Smith, the prosecutor, connected sitting members of Congress to Trump's scheme to overturn the 2020 election. You know, this whole fraud narrative is not just revisionist history. It is preparation for what comes next, and the people who were there helping him to engage in this scheme, many of them are still there, so keep an eye on that. Now, here in Indiana, our primary is May 5th. That is a little over 5 weeks away at this point. And this week, we're starting to see a bunch of real ad spending in that race, particularly on the Republican side, where Trump has endorsed Senator Liz Brown and a handful of other Republicans who backed his redistricting gambit, the one that failed in December. He's also backing primary challengers against lawmakers who voted against him on that. Now, this week, former Republican Governor Mitch Daniels came out and publicly defended those same lawmakers facing primary challenges. So you've got Trump on one side trying to purge his party's dissenters, and Mitch Daniels, who, listen, I blame him for a lot of the state of Indiana's problems. Since he was in charge some 20 years ago, he planted these seeds, and now he's trying to say, oh, it wasn't me. But you've got Democrats quietly flipping seats across the country and, you know, maybe set up to actually capture some seats here in Indiana in the fall. We'll see how this shapes out on our turf in 5 weeks. And I guess, you know, I'll ask you, Dr. Rob, on the Indiana front, if we're seeing these elections in Florida and elsewhere where Democrats are making up 8, 10, 15 point deficits from the last couple years ago. I haven't done all the math on that here, but we can certainly, Democrats can certainly at least overcome the supermajority that way. I mean, I don't think they're going to like swing the legislature to Democratic control, but I think they're looking at picking up more than the 4 seats that they need to break the supermajority in the House anyway. What do you think?
Well, I think this is really something that's really heartening when you read about these things. And of course, the Florida ones are just the most recent, but we've heard stuff over the last month or two from all over the country. These swings of 10 to 20 points, it is really heartening. And I think that's the thing that, so for me, I'm in Southern Indiana, so we're in the 9th Congressional District and actually live in the 62nd Indiana House District. And that's one where Dave Hall is the Republican who's really vulnerable. So we're really hoping that that the Democrat now who's going to be the candidate, Amy Oliver, could swing that district, and that would be, one of those important places where we can make some progress on whittling away or hopefully getting rid of the Republican supermajority, which would make a huge difference in our state politics. But the Indiana 9th Congressional District is also really exciting for me because, and I'll just do a little self-promotion here, but our group, Medicare for All Indiana, along with the League of Women Voters of Monroe County, Bloomington, the League of Women Voters of Brown County, the NAACP branch of in Bloomington, Hoosier, the Rural Summit, a bunch of groups are all putting together a community conversation on healthcare in Bloomington at St. Mark's Church at 7 p.m. Coming up soon on Tuesday, April 7th. And we're going to have 5 or so candidates to talk about healthcare specifically, and to talk about it at the state level with Medicaid and at the national level with what should be done there, including Medicaid and Medicare for all those kinds of things. And the Republican incumbent down here in Indiana 9 is Erin Houchin, and she is right now still in the old playbook of she's declining to attend. She's not going to show up. And I hope that she really comes to regret that. And I want to say one more thing. I may have said this last time I was on, but in the Indiana 9th, there's been quite a bit of analysis. So that's, Bloomington down to New Albany, and so that district, when you can get the numbers and see how many people in the 9th district are covered by Medicare or Medicaid. And in most counties, Monroe County, because it's relatively wealthy, is an exception, but pretty much every other county in the 9th district, about 50% of the registered voters are covered by Medicare or Medicaid. And so what if all those people decided to vote their interests to protect Medicare and Medicaid and voted on the Democratic side? Now, I guess maybe I got to be careful about my 501c3 status here, but I'm very interested in these issues. And actually, in some of the counties here, if you count in Medicare, Medicaid coverage by the VA, and then people who get their health care through the Affordable Care Act and get a government subsidy, 60% of the people living in these rural counties are basically currently enjoying government-sponsored health care, government-guaranteed health care. So what if all these people voted? So I want to get people to think about health care, about affordability, about our personal health and safety. I want to include addiction care, because that ties in. All these things tie in together. And so we've got some reason to think, let's vote. Let's get together. Let's talk. Let's vote.
Maria, do you think this Republican primary coming up, will that sort of give us an indication of the way things are trending? Like, there are these candidates in these state Senate races that have Trump's full endorsement. Then there are those who, pushed back against him at whatever small level in this redistricting fight in December. I mean, who do you want to see come out of those? So on one hand, the less extreme candidate, if they win eventually, you want to have not MAGA Republicans in office. On the other hand, is a Trump endorsement like a kiss of death come November? And you want to see the MAGA candidates win these and go down in flames later. Are they easier to beat? I don't know.
Oh man, so many scenarios to consider. In my very limited, short experience really paying attention to elections, primaries, I still feel a little bit, I wouldn't put a whole lot on what on the primaries showing us. I think they could. I'm not saying they're not going to, but primaries are still not seen or held as important as as a vote in November, right? And to double layer that, midterms, people vote for president, right? And so even when we're talking about immigrant communities, when we're talking about Asian American communities, when I mean that is something that we've heard. So just everyone tuck that away. That they don't quite understand yet, because Hoosier Asian American Power is working, doing the work, to educate, the importance of these midterms, of primaries, of, things like that. Is Donald Trump's endorsement a kiss of death? I think potentially. And so come on, thank you for kiss of death and Liz Brown. Thank you. Okay. Also, Dr. Rob, and I need to be careful, but anyway, also Dr. Rob, I feel like this is what you talked about in terms of Medicaid and Medicare, and we need that. There's an organizing opportunity here, because let's get a bus and go around and pick people up. Let's just do that. It has to be an accessible bus, right? We could find one. Let's do that. That's what it's going to take, because if I'm somebody who is differently abled, if I'm somebody who has to schedule rural transit to go to our precinct, whatever's, instead of maybe on my way to my doctor's appointment or my case management appointment, I'm going to just stop at this vote center. That's a whole bunch of business that I don't have time or energy for, honestly. And I'm saying that as an able-bodied person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just be you want picked up, we'll come get you. We'll take you to the polls. Let's do that. It's not hard. It's not logistically, we won't get everybody, but we can get some people. We can get more people. And so I'm not, I don't know. I adore you, and I adore your work, and I adore being on this podcast with you. And let's not just sit here and say, oh, I hope that happens. All right, maybe that can happen. Let's make it happen. It's not hard. Let's just get a bus.
Yeah, and on that line, I don't have the date right now, but the Indiana Rural Summit did a Medicaid motorcade last year, and they're going to do another one coming up here. I wish I had more data at my fingertips, but that's the idea, is to get people out there and looking at this and talking about this and bringing it home, because we need to all pull together to figure out, how do we mobilize the energy that's right there waiting for us to mobilize.
But I don't think it's a mystery, right? Transportation, especially in rural, we're in Southern, so we have a lot of rural, so it's not a mystery that transportation is one of the major barriers, right? So let's just get a bus. Mm-hmm. I'll see you at that.
It's ironic.
Marks or whatever.
Great.
The logistics we're talking about here, to get people to the polls, mail-in voting would solve all of this. Trump gets to mail and vote, and he's out here trying to crush it. It's the irony is not lost on me. Let's move on and talk about AI a little bit here, and a couple tech stories, and I sort of want to breeze through these because I want to spend a little more time on the social media aspect of tech this week. But OpenAI, that's the ChatGPT people, they shut down Sora, their AI video generation app, less than a year after its launch. Disney had signed a multi-billion-dollar investment deal with them just 3 months ago, licensing over 200 characters for use in these Sora-generated videos. That deal is now dead. No money ever actually changed hands. The math on Sora was always brutal. Apparently, this thing cost $15 million a day to operate against a total lifetime revenue of about $2 million. That is not sustainable. OpenAI is pivoting to robotics instead, apparently. Now, speaking of which, Melania Trump walked side by side with a humanoid robot down the red carpet at a White House AI summit this week. Pictured here, an emotionless android and also an AI-powered robot. Google, which has been facing copyright lawsuits from studios, now appears to be the only player left standing in the AI video domain. Anthropic, that's the people who make Claude, that AI model won a preliminary injunction this week against the Trump administration and the Department of Defense. The Pentagon had demanded unrestricted access to Claude for any use, including autonomous lethal weapons and mass domestic surveillance of Americans. Anthropic refused, so Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth branded them a national security risk. This is the first time an American company ever received that designation, but a federal judge in San Francisco this week ruled the Pentagon's actions were, quote, classic illegal First Amendment retaliation, and blocked the ban. The judge wrote that nothing in the law supports the Orwellian notion that an American company may be branded a potential adversary and saboteur of the U.S. for expressing disagreement with the government. The fight isn't over, but it is a significant win. Now, on the data policy front, Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pushed for a moratorium on new data center construction this week, citing the enormous energy demands on the grid. Democratic Senate counterpart Mark Warner, however, called this idiocy. Now, here in Indiana, we got a reminder of how this plays out locally. The legislator had proposed a 1% incentive payment from data centers to local governments to compensate the communities. Data center lobbyists, however, met privately with legislators and gutted it to about 1/14 of what the Senate had approved. So a data center with a $500 million annual electric bill would now pay a maximum of $350,000 to local governments instead of the $5 million number that was put out there. And also concerning, and this sort of goes along with Senate Democrat Mark Warner's statement, according to Indiana congressional candidate Destiny Wells in a Facebook post, Indiana Democratic Party leadership directed its members to support data centers because organized labor wants the construction jobs, even if the communities hosting these facilities don't necessarily want them there. That, I believe, Doc, is concerning. You mentioned Indiana Rural Summit in the last segment. I know one of the things they're hearing about from in these rural communities is that nobody wants these data centers in their areas. You're hearing it in the urban communities too. In Indianapolis, they're in the process of trying to fight off a couple of these. Nobody wants them except the people who are building them. And like we sort of mentioned previously, that seems short-sighted. Like, I get why organized labor wants these jobs. These are good jobs up front, but once the thing's built, they don't really employ anybody. And I don't know. We've talked about in this space multiple times how organized labor is not just one thing. The building trades seem to want these, but if you believe the hype about AI, they're going to put a lot of knowledge workers out of jobs. So I'd like to get your thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to take a Maria deep breath again here. And, the data centers just seem like they're going to provide some jobs during the construction. I hope those are union jobs for sure, because I think I want to do everything to stay in solidarity with my union brothers and sisters, because the unions are an important part of our liberal coalition. But on the other hand, the community people, this is such a wake-up call, because it sounds like these data centers use huge amounts of local water. They increase the electric rates for ratepayers, which is such a horrible stealing from the poor to give to the rich kind of scenario. These things are really noisy, apparently, but they're going to end up running with very, very few humans. I can't even really wrap my head around the future of employment in general in the gig economy as AI is rolling out. But I know my grandkids who are 17 and 20, so they're just kind of rolling out into the world now and looking at their futures, and they and their friends are saying, where are the jobs going to be? So it's a way bigger thing for me to even think about, or us to figure out. But it's a real fear that where are the jobs going to be? And I don't know the answer to that one.
Maria, where are the jobs going to be? And do we need to completely rethink about, what it means to have a job? Listen, I've said this before. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not anti AI, necessarily just out of reaction. I mean, I do not want these things to be placed in prime farmland. I don't want them to use up a ton of energy that the grid can't sustain. Like, we should be using renewable energy. These things should have closed loop water systems, but also, like, the real problem with AI, I don't think is that infrastructure stuff. There are solutions to that. I feel like if we mandate they be used, it's who captures the value of these things. And if all of the value is being funneled to a handful of tech billionaires, that's a problem. If it's not just like, hey, why don't people like only work 20-hour work weeks and take care of each other and make music and make art, and the AI pays for all that, right? Instead of, well, these guys are going to get rich and we're all going to be broke and living in squalor, which is, again, I think capitalism, that's what it would do to us if left to its own devices.
I appreciate that question. And again, Scott, I don't know. We're just on a similar wavelength today, because I was thinking about, when somebody said, when you guys said, not somebody, you guys said, where are the jobs going to be? Like, I'm half in the system in terms of work, and I'm half out of the system. Like, let's start. The jobs are going to be, wherever you want the jobs to be, in terms of growing food, and in terms of, again, like you said, thank you for, taking care of each other. Always, look at, ask the question when, there's a big movement or a big push for something. Always ask and do research in terms of who's benefiting, right? And so if it's a handful of people, then that's telling. And if it's, everybody, it's accessible to everybody, that's also telling. So I would just like to empower, I would like to empower people to create their own jobs. And your worth is not wrapped up in the dollar amount. Your worth is wrapped up in what you can contribute to your community. And so I'm curious, interesting, Rob, my children are 17 and 20 also. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I would love for the 17 and 20-year-olds to see that bigger picture, right? That it's not just, I got to go to work 9 to 5 for a paycheck. I got to go to, be rich and make all this money. Like, how about we just live? And what do we need to do to live and not be, I don't want to say that, not be beholden to systems, right?
Yeah, let's talk about systems and what capital wants and the systems that they design, and stay on tech though, because there were a couple major developments in the social media world this week. That unfortunately we don't have as much time to talk about this as I'd really like to, but so a New Mexico jury determined this week that Meta, that's Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and whatever else sits under their corporate umbrella, they knowingly harmed children's mental health and concealed what it knew about child sexual exploitation on Facebook and Instagram. The verdict ordered the company to pay $375 million based on 75,000 violations of state consumer protection law. The jury there found that Meta's design choices, like infinite scroll, autoplay videos, algorithmic feeds built around engagement rather than well-being, were deliberate and targeted young users. The next day, a jury in Los Angeles found both Instagram, that's Meta again, and YouTube, that's Google, liable in what amounts to the first major trial over social media addiction. That case was brought by a young woman who documented how the platforms kept her scrolling for 16-hour stretches. Meta was ordered to pay over $4 million in combined compensatory and punitive damages there. YouTube, $1.8 million. What matters here isn't the dollar amounts, because it's really a drop in the bucket for these companies with, annual capital spending over $100 billion each. It's that juries are now examining internal memos and executive testimony and concluding that these platforms were engineered to addict, especially young users. There is a local angle here, too. Over 100 school districts in Indiana have joined a multi-district lawsuit against Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, and Google, arguing the same thing. The schools are quantifying direct costs: guidance counselor time, behavioral interventions, classroom disruptions from students who can't disconnect. But there is also a more visceral reason that this matters right now. Haley's Army for Children, a new organization launched out of Indianapolis, exists because of what happens when that addictive design intersects with predatory contact. Haley Busby, a 17-year-old girl from Fishers, went missing in January after meeting a man online through video games. Turns out this guy was a 39-year-old from Ohio, groomed her for over a year before meeting her, transporting her across state lines, and killing the girl. Sadly, her parents, Bo and Rania Busby, created Haley's Army to do prevention work on the front end, teaching kids and families about grooming and online predators. And they're pushing for something called Haley's Law, legislation that would establish what they call a pink alert system for missing children who don't qualify for amber or silver alerts. And this would also require Indiana schools to teach online safety awareness. Now, I don't know if putting this job on the schools is maybe like they're already trying to do too much, but maybe the social media companies can pay for it. Dr. Rob, we talked about addiction before, previously, in terms of oil, in terms of American comfort. And we've talked about the deleterious effects of capitalism and how they always think in the short term, and they've got to, do what's best for that quarter, and they'll take shortcuts and they'll skirt the law and they'll do things that are illegal or unethical at very best, right? Is this the beginning of some sort of real consequence? Are we going to do something about, oh no, we lost Dr. Rob? Maria, I'll come to you with the same question. Are we going to see some sort of real consequences? Are they going to have to change up these algorithms? Are they going to have to put protections in place? Or is it just going to be like what the tobacco companies did before, and they're going to pay a big fine and then keep doing the same thing?
This, I feel very passionately about, not this like social media, but in terms of treating the symptoms, I am just not a fan. I mean, I get it. There's all kinds of work, right? But we talked about hugs from our mothers like before, right? And that rings true here. And it doesn't have to be your biological mother. It's a caregiver, right? It's somebody who cares for a person. And I hold a lot of space for generational trauma, so I'm not coming after parents, but I am saying that spending all this time and money in these litigations and then creating new policies and stuff like that, like it's not going to do the job that they think it's going to, or they hope it's going to do. Now, if they would put that time and money and maybe, into local mental health, improve it in the affordability. We've talked about that a little bit, and that was on the agenda, but anyway, and, put in terms of creating conditions where people aren't just in survival mode and can really, connect with one another. Like, let's do that. One of our local elected officials meets with me every now and then, and she's always like, "Tell me what I don't know," and I'm like, or where do these Narcan boxes need to go? And I'm like, listen, what the conversation about I'm interested. I don't want to have these conversations anymore because I'm interested in creating conditions at that ground root level where Narcan boxes aren't needed, or maybe not as many, right? Or maybe it's open to all, things like that. So that's my point here, is that maybe pass legislation in terms of these companies need to pay a certain amount of money into grants, or into something supporting schools, like you said, or into I don't think the schools is the answer, because the schools have their own issues that they need to they need to start telling the truth about American history. They need to start being anti-racist, right? They have a lot of other things that they need to be doing. And so I'm curious about the policy, passing a policy or something that these large social media companies or whatnot, need to contribute some money into creating conditions where people aren't looking to escape their lives.
Yeah, and I think that's certain, and we have to sort of do these things in tandem, right? You have to build the infrastructure for us to have more meaningful lives, while at the same time you're taking care of people where they're at now. Sort of weaning off, right? Building the future you want, while helping people who are in the throes of addiction or whatever now, get to where they need to be. So I hate to turn the corner without hearing from Dr. Rob on this, but he's having some connectivity issues. And we've only got about 15 minutes here, so I do want to make sure we get to this next story. Unfortunately, it's the one where I wanted to hear from Dr. Rob the most. But let's hope he can get back. And yeah, I think he's having some internet connectivity issues right now. So on healthcare this week, though, we are continuing to see more cases of measles, with outbreaks growing in Texas and spreading across the country. This is not some random public health failure. It's directly connected to what's happening at the federal level right now. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. is systematically dismantling the United States healthcare infrastructure and sowing distrust in the institutions that are supposed to protect us. That's what's causing this. People are demonstrating at NIH headquarters, or they did so yesterday, because they understand the connection. When you gut research funding and tell people not to trust public health agencies, you don't get better outcomes, you get measles outbreaks. Here in Indiana, Governor Mike Braun is out there touting what he calls major healthcare wins in 2026, except they're not major. Meanwhile, an IU report shows Indiana lags behind the nation in primary and preventative care. 2 Indianapolis Planned Parenthood clinics are closing in April, and this is what the collapse of prevention infrastructure looks like. So I guess, Maria, I wanted to get all those things out there, but really I wanted to come back to looking at our systemic failures in this country as an addiction problem. The same way the tobacco companies in the 1960s, they said, oh, tobacco doesn't cause cancer. And they drug it out for decades before paying like a big fine in the 90s. And now they've just evolved. Now it's vapes. Like, they're still doing the same shit, right? The oil and climate change, they took the exact same playbook of the tobacco companies in lying about the effects of their products. Somebody in the chat was mentioning opioid addiction earlier. Same thing. Addiction to comfort. We talked about this as Americans. We don't want to get out of our comfort zone. We want to be catered to at all times. And then finally the social media, which we just talked about, designed to be addictive. I think it is a sign of something deeper. I don't know if it's the nature of capitalism, that they always just take things to the extreme and they make it so you gotta have it, or if it is a sign of like just some sort of rot at the root of our society, that we always have to, I don't know, mask or dose, or what's the word I'm looking for? We numb ourselves with something.
And so can you say just a little bit more about that theory in terms of healthcare? What were your thoughts connecting the
Well, just,
addiction and the health?
I mean, addiction, right? We all know it is a medical condition, right? It is not like a moral failing, like, these like conservatives would have you believe, like, oh, if you're addicted to something, it's because you're a bad person and you, like,
Mhm,
I don't
mhm.
know, didn't submit to God or whatever. And not like, oh, there are systems designed to make us addicted in this way, and we need to treat things systemically in maybe a medical sense. Is addiction as a disease. The America needs an intervention.
Well, that's for sure. That last part, that's for sure. Um, and again, I'll go back to, I think I was having trouble like making the connection between health. Well, anyway, um, I'll go back to what I said just a little bit ago in terms of creating conditions that we don't feel like we need to escape from.
Mm.
We don't that we need to numb. Like, let's create conditions where like our nervous system can just rest. And I just have to say my work here was done a little bit ago when Dr. Rob was like taking breaths. Like, if that's my legacy of taking, like, let's go. Like, my work here is done. But anyway, that's what, like, let's create those conditions where everything is just rested a little bit more. And yeah, that we want to live this life, that we want to be present, that we want to have healthy babies. I mean, taking it back to healthcare in Indiana being like, very, very low on or actually, that's not true, very high on the infant mortality rate, right? Um, and then also taking it more local in terms of the legislature, calling all this fraud in our Medicaid. And if you looked at it, though, if you looked at it and if you listened, which I did, and it caused me to spiral, but that's a whole nother topic, that I listened to the whole session where Senate Bill 1 was discussed. And
Mm.
it was brought out, thankfully, that the fraud wasn't from the end user. The fraud was from the providers. And so they're calling all this fraud, and they're reducing all this to get rid of this fraud, and it's not hurting anybody but the end user, which are Hoosiers. And so clearly doing the opposite of creating
Yeah.
conditions where we don't feel like we have to numb ourselves just to get through the freaking day, right?
When you said, well, to tie those things together, you said it's the providers, which are run like businesses, and they need to focus on the bottom line, and the
That's
the
right.
capitalist beast seems to keep needing fed,
It's
whether
not
it's the
working.
oil beast or the tobacco beast or the social
Mhm.
media beast or the healthcare beast. And so really, I think what I'm saying is that the disease is capitalism.
100%. I'm saying that too.
So I guess let's talk about our final story this week and yesterday's massive No Kings rallies. And
Mm.
they're very, very broad in nature and probably won't give you that critique of capitalism that I'm looking for, but it does get a lot of people in the door. And yesterday, more than 3,100 locations in all 50 states and over a dozen other countries for that matter, millions of people turned out for the third No Kings Day of Action. Organizers estimated at least 8 million participants, which they're calling the single largest day of nonviolent protest in American history, more than the 5 million who came out last June and more than the 7 million who came out in October. The flagship rally was held in St. Paul, Minnesota, chosen deliberately because that is where federal agents killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy during an immigration enforcement surge in neighboring Minneapolis. Bruce Springsteen performed there alongside Joan Baez. Jane Fonda was there, as was Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Grievances at rallies from coast to coast centered on immigration enforcement, the war in Iran, and the broad collapse of democratic norms in our country. Of course, the White House called the whole thing a product of leftist funding networks with no real public support. I don't know. 8 million people in the streets looks like public support. Here at the Crossroads in Indiana, more than 60 Indiana cities held No Kings events yesterday. Hey, Dr. Rob is back. So from courthouse lawns and monument steps, from Bloomington to Evansville, South Bend, Fort Wayne, and small towns in between, organizers say 12,000 people turned out at the Indiana State House in Indianapolis alone. That event has grown every round, a few thousand in June, 6,000 in October, reportedly 12,000 yesterday. What stood out wasn't the size alone, but who was there, right? For some folks, this was their first time marching or protesting anything. Indianapolis organizer Kim Saylor said, plainly, they're not trying to change minds anymore. You've either picked a side or you haven't. This is about mobilizing people as things get worse so they can take care of each other when institutions won't. One Indie Action Coalition organizer said she simply cannot yell at her TV out of rage. She has to go and do something. In a state where Democrats don't seem to get elected anyway, that kind of clarity about what these protests are actually fighting for might be the most honest thing I've heard recently from anywhere. And now we've only got, maybe 2 minutes, 3 tops to cover this whole thing. Dr. Rob, minute and a half. Give me your takeaways from yesterday.
Okay. And sorry I was gone there, but I found my way back. I had to use my wife's computer. So it feels good to me to get together with other people. It feels good to me to spread the energy. And I know sometimes people say, well, these events where people just turn out, that, they're just these little flashes in the pan, and what you really got to do is organize. And I'd say, yes, they are flashes in the pan, and they're good for us, and they need to inspire us to organize. But people do what they can do. And for some folks, just getting out there is a good thing to do, and feeling that solidarity, because it feels like, wow, there really are a lot of us here. We're not just being squashed under the boot of some kind of ICE agent type thugocracy, but really there are things we can do. But I think the first step is to go and feel good and get some energy and connect with some people. And the second step is then figure out what can I do then to bring it home.
I'm glad you laid it out that way, Doc, because Maria, I'm going to ask, like, the criticism of these events is that, okay, it feels good to get out there and you shout at the void, but then what? Right? It can't just be a nice Saturday afternoon in the park. It has to be a connection to the next step, right?
100%. And I agree with what Dr. Rob said. And, it is good to get in community. That's the solve, the balm right now is getting in community. And I would love to see a No Kings on a Friday. I would love to see a No Kings on a Wednesday. People walking out of their freaking jobs. Oh, clearly I feel some type of way about this. But people walking out of their jobs and making the same stance. Not on a balmy Monday or Saturday. We're going to put up some tents. We're going to get together and hold some signs. No, let's disrupt the economy. What are we doing? And so we have very little energy, right? And so let's use that energy in a very strategic way. And so this is No Kings 3 or NK3, as people like to say. And I like do a sign because that's anyway. Let's have No Kings 4 on a Wednesday, on a Monday, 3-day weekend. Nobody's going to work on a Monday. Let's do that.
And you know what? To tie it to what we were just talking about, you got to starve the beast, and the system is not going to get it until we make the moneyed class hurt. All right, we've only got a minute left here. Thank you both. Dr. Rob, where can the folks find you online?
So Medicare for All Indiana, just spelled out as one word, will get you to our Facebook. But more and more we're using Substack, as so many other groups have. And so if you just write us all one long word, Medicare for All Indiana.substack.com, that gets you in touch with us. And then, as always, the umbrella organization for me is Physicians for a National Health Program, and that's pnhp.org.
Very good. Thank you very much. Maria, where can the folks find out about Hoosier Asian American Power?
Hoosier Asian American Power, HoosierAAP.org, at HoosierAAP.org on all the socials except for the formal Birdie one. And you can find me, because Asians aren't a monolith, right? So you can find me usually just Maria Douglas, or on Instagram, What is Maria Doing? On TikTok, What is Maria Doing Now?
Very good. Thank you very much. And folks can find me, as usual, online at most of your social media sites at Who's Left. Again, we could really use your help with a subscription over at progressiveindiana.net. Lots of good stuff coming out over there. Tonight, I am back for another virtual town hall with 9th District Congressional candidate Brad Meyer. That is at, I put 7 o'clock on the graphic. It is actually at 7:30 tonight. So 7:30 tonight, progressiveindiana.net with Brad Meyer. Derek Holder at Hold'em Accountable has 3 more interviews this week. Monday with Reverend David Green, who's running for state senate in District 29. One of his opponents on Wednesday, and Friday, Jack Chance is there. Tuesday, 7 p.m., I am back here with Equality Indiana Executive Director G. David Caudill. And Thursday, of course, Concerned Clergy of Indianapolis podcast drops first thing in the morning. 2 more debates this week. House District 63 Thursday night, House District 48 Saturday afternoon. Saturday, we should also have something from the Recovered Republican on Progressive Indiana Network. A lot going on. We could use your support. Enough of the commercial. All right, we got to run. We've run long. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Maria. Appreciate you both. Appreciate you there in the crowd. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Love each other, Indiana.